Hello, my name is Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. Excuse me one moment. I'm recovering from a cold, and I'm pretty much out of the coughing and, more unsavory phases of a cold, but I do still have a kind of funny voice right now, and I will probably have to interrupt myself and take some sips of iced tea from time to time in order to make sure that I'm not, making obnoxious noises while recording. If you are a returning viewer, it is so nice to see you again. I really missed you. And if you are a new viewer, thanks so much for checking me out. This is my co-host Thistle, the puppy. And my cat usually wanders in as well. Her name is Moth, so we shall see if she shows up. Because I'm a little bit out of practice, I've decided to do a Project Snapshot episode, which means that I'll be talking about my works in progress, and that will form the meat of the episode. I do have a few administrative things to get out of the way, and then at the end I'm going to talk about some podcasts that I have been watching and enjoying, because I always seem to forget to do that when I'm recording the bigger episodes, so I'm going to try putting them into the work in progress episodes and see if I have a better memory that way. Usually by the end of the big episodes, I'm horrified at how long it's been running, and so I start talking quickly, and I'm trying to wrap things up soon, and half the time my camera battery is dying. Okay, so administrative stuff. First of all, you might have noticed that on my last two videos, there's a comment from Dr. Peter Gregg, who is a professor and researcher at a university here in the U.S., and he is basically a sociologist, and he is conducting a research study on viewers of knitting podcasts, but not for marketing purposes. I asked before I agreed to give him permission to post his links. So basically, if you would like to participate in a survey, the links are on the comments of my last two episodes. The survey is open until July 23rd, and in addition to just the fun of getting to, talk about yourself, see it in research, you can choose to be entered into a raffle for a couple Etsy gift cards. So, yeah, I know that the comment seems a little sketchy at the beginning, just because it says the podcaster approved and not my actual name. But I did approve, and I did ask questions about the point of the research study before I approved. It's also time to finally give away those sweaters that I showed on my last episode. At the time, I did not realize it would be 2 months before I recorded again. Things have just been crazy in the good way. I had house guests for pretty much all of June. My mom and niece came up, and that was wonderful and amazing, but also not conducive to podcasts. I'm really not sure where May went. I'm not really sure why I never podcasted. But here we are. It's July. And hopefully no one froze in May, because it took me a while to draw for these sweaters. In case you didn't see my last episode, there are a couple of sweaters that I knit out of yarn, and while I love the sweaters and I love the yarn, unfortunately my skin has become more sensitive, and the 15% kid mohair is just not doable for me in a sweater, so I decided to give those sweaters away. So the title pull cardigan, which is the purple one, random number generator selected number 8, who is Seeking Fireflies. So I actually follow her on Instagram, so that's really cool. And I should have looked up her name. I think it's Janet. Hopefully I didn't just embarrass myself on air. I don't have my phone with me. And then for the Hearthside cardigan, random number generator selected number 11, who is Piper now. She has a podcast too, and I plan to watch it very soon, so that will be fun. Yeah, so I felt really overwhelmed by the response, just because now I want to knit you guys all sweaters and send them. I feel really bad that I only had 2 to give out when there were more than 2 people who wanted sweaters. I really didn't expect that. So, I'm sorry to everyone who didn't get a sweater, but happy for those who do. This is why I don't like giveaways. I don't, just because I end up feeling really bad. But anyway, moving on, let's talk about some actual knitting, shall we? I have 3 works in progress, And I suppose I would talk about the sweater first because, let's face it, sweaters are like the most fun. Trying to get it. Okay. So I've been knitting for 4 years, and for the past 3 summers I have knit a summer lace cardigan out of Quince & Company's Sparrow, which is their 100% organic linen fingering weight yarn. And I adore my first 2, and I can't wait to have a 3rd one, and it's definitely a tradition I plan to follow all summer. Usually it doesn't take me this long, but oh, that's why I didn't record in May. I had a knitting slump. I've never had a knitting slump before, but I just pretty much lost all interest in knitting, and I had to kind of force myself to do a little bit of knitting anyway in order to keep my hands limber. But yeah, so it would have been kind of boring to watch me just staring at the camera like, I know that I should be interested in this, but for some reason I'm not. So that's why I didn't record in May. But now, finally, I cast this on and have made some progress, so hopefully I will finish it by the end of July and get to wear it for August, probably even September. With the transitional seasons, I find that linen cardigans are really nice. And I've managed to knot my yarn. Hang on here. Yeah, and then there's always next summer, so I should probably actually be knitting a few more plant-based fiber cardigans every year, because I would say I live in a climate where there's at least 3 months of proper summer, and so that's quite a bit of time. It's like a quarter of the year, and I definitely do not knit a quarter of my projects out of plant-based yarn. It's because it's not as much fun as wool yarn. Plus, I'm kind of in denial because I'm not a huge fan of the heat, and so I like to tell myself that there's not 3 months of summer here until I add it up. For new viewers, it does not usually take me 8 minutes to begin talking about my proper knitting projects. I do apologize for the delay. This is my Sepia cardigan. That's what I'm naming it, and so that's what you'll find with the project page on Ravelry. I'm not following a pattern, so you won't be able to look at a pattern for it. However, I do include links to all of the stitches that I've used on the project page. And I forgot to say this at the beginning, but for these kinds of episodes, I don't really do show notes, so I will include the links to the podcast I mentioned down at the bottom. But I do keep project pages, and I make sure that there are links to any techniques or stitches that I talk about and can find online. So if you're ever wondering about a toe or a heel from when I'm knitting socks, or a stitch pattern, all that kind of stuff, please check the project pages first. If I've forgotten, I'm happy to add it, but I usually make sure that it's all set before I publish the podcast. So, as I said, this is in Quince & Company Sparrow, which is their organic linen. Their linen lines are not made in the U.S., unlike the rest of their yarn. They're made in Belgium. I believe that there's no source for organic linen here in the U.S. I think that's what Pam Allen was saying on one of her podcasts. Anyway. And this gorgeous colorway is called Truffle. I love it. It's just a beautiful taupe with kind of purple and pink overtones, and it's going to fit in really well with my summer wardrobe. And as you can see, I have knit the body in one piece, and I'm going to join the arms and do a raglan construction, and that's because although I prefer to knit my wool sweaters in pieces and then seam them, for the linen I prefer to do as little seaming as possible because I find that the seaming shows more than it does in wool. And I also like that for warmer weather, I like the kind of slouchier feel. Plus that way I don't have to interrupt the lace. So, for all those reasons, and I do knit the body all in one piece. Wow, I am out of practice. I have noticed that the linen has a tendency to bias, but since I'm knitting a cardigan, not a jumper, knitting it all in one piece is still flat, so I'm avoiding the bias that way. When I knit the sleeves, which I've started the first one, I do knit those flat, and then I just seam them up later. I left a nice long end for seaming, but I can still join it for a raglan shaping at the ends. So, the first sweater that I made with this yarn, I knit the sleeves in the round, and they do twist a little bit. It's not terrible, but if you can avoid that, then I'm definitely going to go ahead and do that. So, this was actually my second plan for this yarn, At first I was envisioning a kind of lace sampler sweater. In the first Barbara Walker Stitch Treasury, when she's introducing the chapter on lace, she says that you can make a sweater that's kind of like an errand cardigan with, cable panels, only with lace panels instead. And I've always thought that that would be really fun. And so I had picked out all these different lace patterns that fit with the stitch counts I needed and I thought would look good together. And then when I did a swatch, it turns out that, linen looks different than wool when you're knitting with it. And even though this will change dramatically once I wash it, it just behaves differently than wool, which makes sense. And I felt like rather than looking charmingly interesting, that many different lace patterns just looked disorganized and a bit of a hot mess. Whereas the other linen cardigans that I've made had an all-over lace stitch pattern on the body, and they all looked lovely. So I went to Plan 2, which is this lace pattern that I've loved, once again, since the first time I saw the Barbara Walker Stitch Treasury, Volume 1, and it's called the Shower Stitch. And as you can see, it is very delicate and open and lacy. And this was always kind of the backup plan for this yarn because while I might worry about all this openness in a wool yarn, I don't have to worry about it at all in a linen yarn because there is no way all this yarn in the yarn overs, there's no way for it to snap. Linen is very sturdy. So I just really love how this is turning out. And I plan to continue the lace up into the yoke on the body part. For the sleeve, I mainly do it in stockinette, and that's because if I'm wearing a long sleeve cardigan in the summer, it's because I want the sun protection. So I like having the sun protection that comes from the stockinette, and that's also why I chose to do a raglan construction this time, is because I figured that way I'd have that solid stockinette protecting my shoulders as well. Last year's cardigan was also a raglan construction, although top down. I did that following a pattern. And I really like how that one wears. So I decided to choose a kind of complementary lace stitch to run up as a panel because the shower stitch doesn't really lend itself to panels. You would have half of a stitch on each side. So I believe this is Lace Medallion. Once again, the link will be on my project page. And it will, this yarn changes so much when you wash it. I plan to review this yarn on my next episode, so you'll be able to see the differences. But I think that complements it well. Basically, I was looking for a lace stitch that would work as a panel and also had patterning on both sides, like the shower stitch does. There we go. I will say both of those stitches, because they have patterning on both sides and because I'm knitting flat, that means that I'm doing purl 2 through the back loop, purl 3 through the back loop on the shower stitch, but Barbara Walker gives a great solution to avoid that. Instead, you purl 2 together, and then you put the resulting stitch back on the left-hand needle, and then you lift that third stitch over it. So you still get the slant going the correct way, and you don't actually have to try to get your needle through 3 stitches in reverse. But honestly, I don't have that many issues purling. For example, I find like purl 3 together or purl 5 together much easier than knitting 3 or 5 together. I think it's because I hold my needles quite horizontally. So patterning on both sides wasn't a huge deal to me, although it did mean that the body grew more slowly because it needed constant attention. And I was knitting it while watching TV, but the other issue is that I'm using my metal needles. These are actually placeholder needles. I'm using my Diet Craft heavy metal needles, and I love these needles. However, they're very slippery, and linen yarn is very slippery as well. And so when I knit, I bunch all the stitches up right here so that it'll go faster. But the problem is that linen likes to jump off the needles more than wool does, and once it's off the needle, it likes to drop. Oh my gosh. And since this lace pattern was patterned on both sides, trying to pick up those drop stitches, and especially, I mean, you can see not only is it patterned on both sides, but it's all about these yarn overs, right? And so trying to pick up the stitches, usually if one would drop, by the time I noticed, there were at least 3 loose stitches, because no matter what stitch dropped, it ended up dropping in a way that, you know, took out one of the decreases, and so that slowed me down as well and made it a slightly less enjoyable knitting experience. There were even a couple times where I ended up just tinking back 2 or 3 rows because I could not figure out how to put it back together in pattern. And that almost never happens to me. I don't usually have a problem recreating things, but I don't usually knit lace like this, especially in slippery linen yarn. The good news is that towards the end, I had gotten good enough that I could recreate the drop stitches, and I felt very triumphant when I managed to do that. But I definitely had more of a problem with drop stitches than I usually do, and I'm sure it's just because slippery metal needles and slippery linen yarn working together to... I should really just not keep so many stitches bunched up really close on the needle, but I like knitting that way. So I did do shaping. If you're a new viewer, you might not realize this. If you're a returning viewer, you know. I like cropped cardigans that fit quite snugly at my waist and then grow to my bust. And I've got about a 9-inch, a 9-inch difference between my waist and bust, which is, what, about 23 centimeters. So I always do shaping in my cardigans. But because this lace is so beautiful and complex, I didn't really want to increase in pattern at the side seams or in the fronts. So instead I just did my shaping via needle change sizes. So I started after the ribbing, which I'll talk about in a minute. I started with size 0s, and then I went up to 1s, 1.5s, 2s, and then at some point during the 2s, I put it all on this nice long cable that I have and measured it to see if it was at my bust measurement yet or if I needed to go up to 2.5s. And the 2s were fine, so this is the measurement that I need. And of course, with lace, you want it to stretch out a little, you know, so you don't want too much positive ease. But yeah, I was definitely more laissez-faire about this, and that's because I swatched enough to get an idea of what I was aiming for, but I didn't do a super thorough swatch because I pay for laundry, and it has increased to $1.75 a load. And at the time I was swatching, I had already done my clothing laundry, and I was not going to do another load just to wash my swatch. And I machine wash and dry my linen sweaters. So it's not like I was going to have a super accurate gauge swatch anyway. Plus, I don't know, I guess I've just been laissez-faire lately. But yeah. Needle sizes. I'm trying to learn them in metric. So I know that a US 0 is a 2.0 metric. But, so that's where I started for all of you metric needles. So that's down here. And then I went up to a US 2, which I think is a metric 3.0. I need to have my phone. I keep looking at where my phone would be. But I'm not positive, I'm sorry. Might be a 2.5. But yeah, and this is an interchangeable needle set, so that makes it really easy to shape via needle size. I was going to talk to you about this waist ribbing. So this is the wheat ear rib. And I really like to match my ribbing to my body stitches, and so I was looking through the same treasury, and this ribbing just seemed like it would go nicely with it. When I'm knitting with linen, I don't expect the ribbing to behave the way that wool ribbing would do. It doesn't really pull in, it's not very elastic, so I just basically am making a band that has enough knit and purls that it doesn't roll. So that's basically the goal with this band versus having a lot of stretch or anything, because as you can see, I mean, it stretches out, but it's not like the ribbing is contracting at all. I noticed, if you look, that you can kind of see that the ribbing is biasing a little, and I think that's because of all the SSKs and Pearl 2 togethers. This one, I also managed to pick a ribbing that's patterned on both sides, so I've been doing a lot of purl manipulating, and it always seems to be purling through the back loops, so I'm getting better at it. Anyway, and I'm not really sure if that will straighten out once I wash it. I could always steam it because it's linen yarn, but honestly, it doesn't bother me that much. But that, I guess, is something to keep in mind, is to choose patterns with caution if you want everything to be perfectly straight. But I think it looks really nice. So. And you can see that shaping going on. I used size 2, so the same as the biggest size for this lace, for this, because this stitch pattern draws in a lot. So, and I actually still, I think I had to do the waistband on more stitches than I did this lace here. So I did swatch. Just, I didn't worry so much about hitting my lace measurements. And I've used, this is the second 50-gram skein to get this high on the body. And this lace stretches vertically, so that's why it looks a little shorter than my... Sorry, my camera battery died on me. Luckily I have 2. As I was saying, when I tried it on, I realized that I liked the lace best when it was stretched a little vertically. So that will definitely, so that's what made me stop when I did. So this hits my natural waist. And when I'm picking lace patterns for linen, I pick patterns that I already like how they look before blocking, because I'm not going to give a hard block to really any sweaters. I don't like having to pin out sweaters. And with linen especially, it's not going to behave the same way as wool, so I just want it to look... Basically, when I wash and dry my linen sweaters, they become a lot drapier and softer, but the nature of how open or closed a fabric is doesn't change too much. So, and now I'm working on the first sleeve. I have just gotten up to the amount of increases I need to do. It's so funny when you knit a sleeve flat, they always just look massive. Maybe that's just me. So I'm just going to go to my usual underarm length, which is somewhere around 16 inches or what, 40 centimeters, I believe. I have short arms. And then I'll knit the second one and be able to join. So I have 6 skeins of yarn to begin with, and that's been enough for the past 2 sweaters that I've knit, with about 100 yards left over each time. So I'm not super worried about yarn chicken, and I am at the halfway point of this sleeve, and I've used less than half the skein of yarn. So I did go ahead and use the same ribbing at the bottom. I tried a few other band options first, just because of the biasing thing, but none of them looked as nice. I don't know, so I just stuck with this again, and it's not twisting quite as badly in the smaller proportion, but you can still see it's headed that way. So we'll see how that goes. Honestly, as long as the sleeves don't move around, which it won't because it's knit flat, I'm not really fussed about whether those columns line up straight or not. It looks pretty to me either way. So that is my Sepia cardigan, and I'm really hoping to have that finished because every time I'm knitting with it, it matches everything I'm wearing. So this color will go very well in my wardrobe. And in addition to wearing them during the day for sun protection, I also like having linen cardigans around because usually, unless we're in a heat wave, it does cool off at night here in the evenings, and that's when I like to walk Thistle because the fireflies are out and it's just a really nice time of day. And if I'm wearing my super lightweight summer outfits, a lot of times I get a little chilly, so that's when the cardigans come in handy. Plus, if I ever have to move back to Texas, linen cardigans for the win. Okay. Sorry, ice crunching is a really bad habit. I will talk about my sock project next. I'm so excited about this. This is the first pair of regular socks I've let myself knit for me this year because I have quite a few hand knit socks right now because I love to knit them. And it seemed like I didn't really need any more, And so I've been really slowing down on my sock knitting. So I've mainly been doing gift sock knitting, and then I've knit myself a pair of knee highs as my travel knitting, but still, I just love regular sock knitting. So I've already finished the first one, and I really, really love how it turned out. So as you can see, I am using a speckled yarn for the first time. Well, actually, my niece picked out speckled yarn for a stuffed squirrel that I made her for Christmas a couple years ago, but that was in her colors. So anyway, this is Plymouth Yarn Happy Feet in the Tuscan Spice colorway, and I got it at my former local yarn store down in Texas, which their annual sale coincides with my Christmas visit to my family, so I always go there. And yeah, I think I got it 2 years ago, and I just really love the colors. It is, of course, a super wash. When I'm shopping locally, I kind of feel like the rules are different than shopping online because any purchase I make is supporting a local store. I don't know. Life is complicated being a responsible consumer. But I really love how the colorway knit up. And the contrast is Quince & Company Finch, which is their fingering weight 100% wool yarn in peacock. And I knit myself a pair of socks out of this, and they were lace socks, and so I had almost a full skein left over, so I knew that that would do really well for the contrast. And I thought it would bring out the teals. Oh, I love this so much. Here, let's do a close-up. Okay. So these socks are the free pattern Rosamond? I think Rosamond. And you'll be able to see it on my project page, which is called The Heart of Fairyland Socks, which is a reference to the Fairyland series by Catherine Valenti, because I'm finally reading the last one, and there's a race to the heart of Fairyland. And do you see this? Arch shaping is what the pattern calls it. You see this line, and there's one on the other side, and it felt to me like they were racing towards the center of the sock. And this whole, I don't know, something about the speckles and then the little decorative scroll just makes me feel like these are Fairyland socks. Like the speckles make me think that if there was ice cream in Fairyland, it would totally look like this, and each speckle would be a different delicious fruit. Why, yes, I am 31. Why would you ask? Okay, so this technique is called Rositude. I am not sure at all if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's an Estonian technique. And I have done it once before on a hat, and I loved it, and I wish that there were more patterns, because first of all, I love the effect, and it's really fun to do as well. So what you're doing is you're weaving the yarn as you knit. And in order to do it in the round, so first you weave this way, and then your yarn is over here, but you need it over here for the next round. So then you do a loop, and you're weaving with the loop. And it's so fun. And you use the yarn doubled so that you get this nice thick effect. At first I was having some troubles because I was leaving the strands loose, kind of the way you would when you're doing stranded color work. You want those strands pretty loose, or at least not tight. And I thought it looked a little sloppy. And as soon as I snugged the strands up, I really liked how that looked. So I'm definitely snugged them up way more than I would for stranded knitting. The nice thing is that because they're woven in, you can adjust the tension anytime on the back. I mean, it takes a little bit of patience because you have to pull each of those loops together. But, it's better than having to frog the whole sock. So I have made a few modifications, and I will tell you about them when I start my new segment. The designer has a striped cuff, heel, and toe. And I chose not to do that because I feel like this scroll work is very elegant, and while I love stripes, in socks they tend to look a little sporty, especially in the cuff, I don't know, versus the body. And I just thought that the elegance of the scroll would go better with a solid contrast. So that's what I did. I did a quite short cuff, and that's because I knew that I wanted to be able to wear these socks with the scroll work showing above both my ankle boots and my Oxfords. And I have quite short legs, so I've noticed, and I wear a lot of knee-length skirts. So I've noticed that if I want to wear my socks, I like them to hit below the fullest part of my calf, and that requires a pretty short leg. So I knew that if I did a longer cuff, then I would have less decorative scroll work. So I shortened the cuff. I also shortened this. I stopped the scroll work at row 46, round 46 of the chart, and the chart goes on to, I think, round 69. So that would have been up here, which, once again, for me, is not the length that I want socks when I'm going to wear them showing with my skirts. I do like to have a variety of length of hand knit socks, but this is the length I like for wearing with Oxfords. When I got to the toe, to the heel, I did try doing the contrast heel that she suggested, but I just didn't like it that much. It's a two-color heel, and I just felt, once again, like it detracted from the scroll work. And then I did debate whether to keep it in the speckled yarn or do the teal yarn. But since the heel cuff starts right here, doing it in the teal would have run into that scroll work, and also usually, because I have quite a high arch, I do quite a high heel flap, and so my shoe ends here and the heel flap starts here. So whatever color I do the heel flap in shows above my shoe, and I just decided that the speckled one would be better for this. So I did my usual Eye of Partridge heel flap. I did not continue the reinforcement into the bottom this time because I wanted to try out her arch shaping, which is written in the pattern. And I just followed her directions for the heel turn. However, the other modification I made is she includes directions for a 64 stitch sock and then I think a 72 stitch sock. And my feet are smaller than that, so when I'm doing socks, I tend to stick with between 56 and 60 stitches. I decided to do 60 stitches this time because I was knitting this English style, but still on size zeros, and I tend to knit more snugly English style. Plus, I've been having a lot more problems with my hips and back in the last couple years, especially the last year. And so getting socks on and off has become fairly painful for me, and so having the socks not quite so snug makes it easier to put them on and off, which limits the amount of time I'm in pain. So keeping it real with chronic illnesses. So for those reasons, I decided to do a 60 stitch sock. It was really easy on the leg because this is just a 15 stitch chart, so I didn't have to do anything special there. And then for the heel flap, I just worked it over 30 stitches and centered the scroll accordingly. And for the heel turn, since she includes directions for two sizes, it's pretty easy to see where you need to drop a couple more to account for a 60 stitch count. But the main difference, and I wrote this on my project page, is on the second row of the heel turn, instead of knitting 7 before turning, well, before decreasing and turning, I only knit 5. And so that made a really nice heel. This arch shaping, I have mixed feelings about. I did it according to the pattern, except I had to make a couple modifications for my shorter stitch count. I had fewer picked up stitches too because my heel flap is a little shorter than hers. I love how it looks. I think it looks really interesting, and it was definitely really fun to do. As someone who is not really a vanilla sock person, having something entertaining to do on the foot of the sock was really fun. And here is what it looks like kind of on the foot. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. So that is really cool. However, and I followed the directions, so I'm not sure if this is what's supposed to happen, or I don't know if it was just something funky with me, but it made the bottom of the sock longer than the top of the sock. I'm not sure if you can see that, but so here's where I did the Kitchener-ing, and on normal socks, they sit flat. But on these socks, there's extra fabric down here and not enough fabric up here, and since my foot is the same length on both the top and bottom, when I wear them, the toe kind of curls up a bit. And it still fits, and it doesn't hugely bother me to have the decreases sitting on top of my toe like this. But it also just seems a little weird. And the fabric just feels a little stretched right here, so I don't think that's the best fit for me. So I probably will not be doing arch shaping again. But it was fun to try. I can get stuck in my ways with socks, so I'm trying to remind myself to actually look at the pattern and maybe try out their methods instead of just stealing the stitch pattern and putting it into my normal preferred sock method. One thing I found very interesting, So the arch shaping is done with decreases on the top and increases on the bottom to compensate. So basically, I guess you're knitting on the bias. Let's see if my camera finds it interesting as well. Here, what if we go horizontally? My camera is in love with my fan, so it just wants to keep focusing on that. Okay, so you can see there's 2 plain stitches and then the increases are on either side. The pattern just tells you to make one on either side. It doesn't tell you to make one right and make one left. But look, it's still symmetric. So even though I used the easier of the two for me, which is make one left, the stitches are moving in both directions. This makes me wonder, have I been doing symmetrical increases for all these years of knitting for no reason? You know, like when you're doing the thumb gusset on mitts or mittens and you're doing it symmetrically. But it would appear that the knitting just magically becomes symmetrical, no matter what direction your increases face. I mean, to me, it looks as if I did make one right and make one left. Here, we're going to block the fan and my face. Maybe. See? It looks symmetrical. Apologies for any cat fur. My cat is cream colored and she sheds white fur like a polar bear. I'm not sure how, she's only 7 pounds. Which is what, 3 kilos? Probably less. Anyway. Yeah, so I'm really curious. Do you guys do symmetrical increases or do you just not worry about them? Are there places where it makes a difference, like lace? I know that decreases make a big difference in lace, but I mean, I've just always done symmetrical increases. It never occurred to me to not do them because I'm that kind of person. I'm detail oriented. So once I knew that symmetrical increases existed, of course I had to do them that way. So that is all I have to say about my first Fairyland sock, I believe. Oh, other than I'm really excited because I finished the first sock. And I wear a size 6.5 feet, which is, I have size 6.5 feet US, which is 37 European and I think a UK 4. I'm not positive about the UK thing though. I guess I've never bought British shoes. I don't know. I know I'm a Euro 37 though, because I bought shoes. And so between a fairly short foot, so you can kind of see what the arch shaping does. Anyway, and then a shorter leg, I ended up only using about 25 grams of the speckled yarn. That time I just exceeded my clip segment. So as I was saying, I used about 25 grams of the speckled yarn and maybe 8 grams of the teal yarn. And so I should have enough left over once I knit my second sock to knit a beret as well, which I'm really excited about because I'm just completely in love with this color combination and fabric. It's prettier in person, but it's pretty darn pretty there too. And any of these like sketchy elongated stitches, that's just because I haven't woven in the ends yet. I don't know how other people join in new colors. I literally just start knitting with them. And then when I go to weave in the end, I just pull it tighter and then it's no longer so much of an issue. Right here, there's also the issue of, you know, the jog and the round. So I'll probably use the extra teal yarn to go ahead and fix that jog. But as you can see, it's easy to sort out afterwards. So there's another one where I switch colors and it looks really bad right now, but it'll look good once I weave in the end. One more project to go. New viewers are probably amazed at how much talking I can do about 3 works in progress. But knitting, so much fascination. Okay. Thistle has given up on me and is on the other end of the couch. She got tired of not being pet. So this is my Fanciful scarf, and it's also self-designed. So you will not find the pattern, but you will find the explanation of what I'm doing on the project page. For a while, I just couldn't think of names for projects, and so that's why Fanciful, Sepia. I just went back to fun words, honestly. So here it is. It's growing. So, It's also really covered in cat fur, but here, I'll do a close-up. The color is much truer when it's back near where I am, but I want you to be able to see those fun, bobbly tassel things, which is why I named it the Fanciful scarf. So you gotta cover up that fan. Hopefully you can see that. And there's what it looks like on so far. So this yarn is also from a post-Christmas sale at my former local yarn store. It's 100% merino lace weight, and it's dyed by the Interlacement Company in the Renaissance colorway. And I don't usually knit with variegated yarn because I'm a control freak, and it really upsets me when the yarn starts pooling or changing colors. It's actually a little lighter than it's showing on the screen. Anyway, without my permission. This is also why I don't do self-striping yarn very often, and why I did not expect to love speckled yarn the way that I have in these socks. Although I did get a little annoyed. Right at the beginning of the gusset, when you have a bunch more stitches, it pulled a little, but not too badly. Anyway, so I got on Instagram and asked the advice of all you lovely knitters who use a ton of variegated yarn and are more relaxed than me as to what I should do to prevent it pooling, and everyone said that I should alternate skeins. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm doing one from the outside and one from the inside because that way it's also going in opposite directions. And I really love how it's looking. It's another really tricky color to find, and the sun has come out even more brightly. I'm not sure. It's probably moved because I talk so much. So I wanted something fairly simple, and at first I was trying to fit this into a pattern that I already have, but I was a little worried about yardage, and it was stressful, and this was when I was still kind of in my knitting slump, so I didn't want to be stressed. I just wanted something simple. And the two scarves that I really enjoyed knitting were both knit the same way. You start from an end, you knit the first half, and then you put it on waste yarn. Then you knit the second half, and then you graft the two together. And that way you don't have to worry about running out of yarn. And I don't know, it just made me really happy. So finally I decided to just self-design a similar scarf that would do the same thing. And I plan to block the heck out of this. So this garter stitch, instead of being squishy, is going to be stretched out like this. And I just thought that that would look really cool with all the color changes. So that's why I decided to do garter stitch as the base, and also of course it's reversible. But then I wanted something kind of fun, and both the other scarves I've done, the interest in the main body is vertical, so I decided to do horizontal this time. And since these are fairly short color repeats, here's the yarn, blocking the fan again, hang on, we're gonna have to kick the fan out of the next recording. It looks too much like a face, I guess. Anyway, I thought baubles would be really interesting because it would probably use up an entire color. So I looked through the stitch dictionaries and I found a bauble pattern that I liked, and it also has these elongated stitches, which once again is just really fun with variegated yarn because of the color usage. And so at the bottom I put the stitches much closer together. At first I tried doing them stacked, but they looked better when they had a little bit of garter definition between them. And then as I went up into the main body, I spread it out, mainly for ease of knitting, because I wanted those nice big swaths of super simple garter. And I did put a little ruffle on the bottom because I figured I was already doing baubles and elongated stitches, and I might as well just throw a ruffle in too. So I really like how this is turning out. However, I'm concerned because I've already used over half my yarn, so I really need to switch to this and start the second length, but it's not really that long yet. See? The last scarf that I knit, that I'll talk about more on my next episode, I used a similar yardage. It was labeled as a little over 900 yards, and I ended up with like a 9-foot scarf. And for reference, I am 5'3". I am, I think, 163, 164 centimeters. I'm not really sure what 9 feet is in centimeters, but it would be a little less than 3 meters. So quite long, almost double my height. And since that was and I used a similar yardage, but I've just realized that that was a heavier lace weight, and this is a, more proper lace weight. But I'm really not sure why this is so short. I know that garter stitch, is much more compact, and the other scarf wasn't stockinette. So I think once I block it, it'll be much longer, and I won't have to worry about it so much. But that's the only thing where I'm like, we'll see. So I need to go ahead and get this into the middle of a garter panel so that I can put it on waste yarn for ease of grafting later, and then start the second half. So, yeah, really pleased with that. The baubles are really simple baubles. Instead of having to go back and forth, you just do a purl 5 together. So, and I did some experimenting. I wanted to try to get baubles on the edging as I was going, but the experiments that I tried, I just didn't really like the result. So I'm carrying the yarn 3 stitches in so that that line isn't on the very edge. And I thought it would be really annoying to have to alternate skeins, but it's not bothering me nearly as much as I thought it would. Yeah, we've definitely entered the part of the afternoon where my apartment just floods with sunlight, which is wonderful for general living, but perhaps not for podcasting. And my cold is starting to make itself known a little more thoroughly. So I will wrap this up. But I think the reason why I'm not super bothered by the alternating, even though I'm knitting this continental, is because I have developed a much less complicated tensioning method for the yarn. If you've seen the videos where I'm knitting continental, you'll see that I used to tension the yarn twice around my pinky and then 3 times around my pointer finger. Is this your pointer finger? And so as you can see, that's quite a bit of faffing about. And so having to do that every other row would be pretty annoying. However, when I was knitting a cardigan that you will see on my next episode, I was swatching for it, and no matter what, I couldn't get gauge. I was always too big, and it was really infuriating me how many needle sizes I had to go down. So I decided that I had to tighten up my continental stitching knitting, but not in a way that put any pressure on my neck and shoulders. Because, in case you're a new viewer, I have chronic pain, basically, and one of the main focuses is in my neck and shoulders. So that's why I hold my needles loosely, I tension my yarn loosely, all that kind of stuff. So I did some experimenting with tensioning, and I discovered that if instead of wrapping it first around my pinky, I just put it between my ring and middle fingers, and then wrap 3 times around my pointer finger, I actually knit more tightly. And I think it's because the yarn is doing the friction method right there. It's getting friction, whereas when it was on my pinky would start pulling up, and so it moved more quickly across here. And my pinky's much happier now that it's not being pulled by yarn. So it took me not very long, actually, to adjust to this method, and I am still not by any means a tight knitter, but I think now I only have to usually go down like 1 needle size when I'm knitting continental, whereas before I was having to go down 2 to 3. So I'm really pleased with that, and it makes fiddling with yarn a bit less of a hassle. So I just thought I would mention that. Oh, and then one more thing about the sock. With the Rositude method, I have found, so I began knitting continental style, and after about a year I taught myself English style too, and now I do projects with both. So I'm comfortable with stockinette with both methods. They're equally nice to me. And so when I'm doing Rositude, I have found that for me it is much smoother and more enjoyable if I'm knitting the main color, English style, or right-handed style. Are there any other names? Throwing, that's the other name. Because that way, this yarn that's weaving, I can hold in my left hand and just kind of flick it back and forth, the way that I purl continental. When I try to hold the background yarn in my left hand continental style and weave, I end up having to put the yarn down more, and it feels like the yarn is getting in its way. But I'm sure that there are lots of continental knitters who very happily do this technique. I just wanted to share, having tried both ways, what worked best for me. Obviously, your mileage will vary, but it's a really fun, really simple technique, and this pattern does include a tutorial. It's the kind of thing that sounds a lot more complicated than it is, but she includes a link to a video demonstration of it, so that will be really helpful. And if you guys want, I could probably record a video of me knitting the second sock just so that you can see how I do it. I am really hoping to get some more tutorials out, and once I have this setup done, it's easy to record several tutorials in a row. So if there's anything that you would like to see me knitting, feel free to let me know, and I will add it to my list. My niece, while she was here, had me teach her some crochet, and we made these little amigurumi octopuses. I like to say octopi, but I was watching Tess of Interim Knits, and she's reading a book about octopuses, and apparently the official plural is octopuses, not octopi. It's not so fun. Anyway, and so she has requested that I do a few crochet tutorials, so we'll see. I might do some video tutorials of that, even though I mainly knit these days and don't crochet. I crocheted a lot as a child, so it's like riding a bicycle. And that is everything that I'm currently working on. I definitely plan to record next week. It will probably be, I might actually record a little early, but yeah, so I promise you that there will be another episode next week where I talk about my finished objects and review Quince & Company linen yarn and basically get back into the rhythm of podcasting because I've really missed it, and so I am making sure that I reprioritize it. I almost forgot to tell you about the podcast. So I figure I'll talk about 4 today just because more than 4 just seems a bit unwieldy. And these are all podcasts where I followed the people on Instagram first and then happily discovered that they had podcasts. One is an audio, so we'll start with that, and that is Mrs. M's Curiosity Cabinet. That is Meg, who I've really enjoyed getting to know and talking with. She is very interested in environmental and social issues around consumption and making and having a creative life. And so I was really thrilled when she started a podcast because she talks about all those issues as well as just the very interesting projects that she's doing. She's very multi-craft jewel, so that reflects itself in the podcast. And it's really nice to have an audio podcast because I like listening to them when I'm doing chores and that kind of stuff that I can't sit and watch a video podcast. The second one is, Yarning Over the Days with Constance, and hers I think is the newest. Yeah, she only has 2 episodes out, but they're both great. It's on YouTube, and she is currently in South Carolina. She's from Alabama, and she's doing a very interesting sounding doctoral project with like library science and history and that kind of stuff. But she is also both a knitter and a sewist, and she has a great vintage retro style, and it's right up my alley. Lots of cropped cardigans and fit and flare dresses that she pairs them with. I wish I had her sewing skills. And she's just very fun to watch. And she's been knitting for quite a long time, and she's very accomplished. The projects she makes are beautiful. So if you're interested in garment knitting, that's mainly what she does. Then there is Celine of Basic Stitch Knitting. Celine is in Hong Kong. And she does quite a variety of projects, and she's just really fun. She has a very direct, kind of no-censored approach to podcasting, and she makes me laugh a lot with her observations. And I'm also in awe of the fact that she is podcasting in English because I'm in awe of anyone who's podcasting in a language that is not their, native at-home language. And yeah, so even though she's in Hong Kong, she knits with a lot of woolly wools, and so she doesn't let her climate get her down, I guess you would say. And she's just another really fun podcaster. I'm very bad at describing podcasts. Obviously, I'm choosing to spend my time watching all these podcasters, so I really enjoy their company. Finally, there is Freya Spins. She had started podcasting a few months ago, and then she took a break, which is the only reason I hadn't mentioned her before. But now she's back. So she is German, and in addition to knitting, she spins, and she talks about both on her podcast, and she's very skilled at both, and she likes to design her own knitwear and that kind of stuff. So she is another really fascinating, really enjoyable podcaster to watch. It was great catching up with you, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!